In today's clip, I want to examine the competing truisms about holding cash and whether it's really the best way to go about it on one's personal finance journey or one of the worst. Hey, XenPuck here. So, who doesn't love cash, right? Those little greenbacks with the president's faces on them? Well, most of them. Shout out to Hamilton for being a non-president that's made it on the US Treasury bill. I initially thought he was the only non-president to make it onto cash, but that's apparently not the case. There is another. Anyway, so in the personal finance sphere, people definitely say both of the following phrases, okay? Cash is king and cash is trash. I always found this juxtaposition quite confounding. I mean, how can the same item be both exalted and insulted by the same people? Now, what is the truth? And if there is some middle ground, which one is more true? So let's examine both separately and then see if we can reconcile both long-standing ideas for our own current age and adjust for our personal situations, right? 1. Cash is king. Well, there's definitely some obvious truths to this, right? I can easily list advantages of holding cash, such as security. Having cash means you don't have to worry about emergencies, and cash is the only way to get, most consumer goods. You can't make it rain in a club with digital currencies, right? There's something visceral about cold hard cash, which is why we hear songs talking about its glory more often than any other type of assets, right? Also, because of its physicality, most people do feel more of a pain parting with it than, say, paying with credit cards, right? So this may be a helpful psychological trick to help people control their spending, a la, Dave Ramsey and all that baby step nonsense, right? Also, some smaller businesses will only take cash. That's true. This is because even paying with credit cards costs the vendors, right? Which results in higher prices for consumers. Also, in the USA at least, plenty of tips still change hands via cash, even if the purchase itself was made with credit or debit cards, right? And finally, one of the major points is that some establishment will literally offer a cash discount as a way to pass on the savings of credit card surcharges to the end customer, right? Oh, and on a definition front, cash is literally the most liquid of all assets, backed by an institution that's, your respective governments, which, whether we like it or hate it, it is most likely to endure, right? This bit is a plus compared to, say, whatever's backing cryptocurrencies, right? So really, to me, it seems like cash is king. This sentiment is all about convenience and ease of use, right? We love cash because we're used to it. In the USA, at least, cash hasn't really fallen out of favor. You read about it falling out of favor, but it's enduring. Its usage is slowly being chipped away by newer and more digital methods, but it's still at least about half of all small value transactions, okay? So it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. I'd say that the security blip is my favorite thing about cash, right? Personally, I keep about 30 to 40 bucks on my person, just in case. In case of what? What if I was hacked when I'm out and about and need to buy some kind of physical ticket home, or at least call someone, right? Having zero cash would all of a sudden become like a huge problem. I'm sure you can think of some other emergency scenarios, things like having cab money home. Scenarios like that where having a little bit of cash will be very helpful, right? Now, let's move on to why some people say cash is trash instead. First, I can address some rebuttals to the king sentiment in terms of convenience, right? For things like most stores, they won't actually give you a cash discount. So people actually paying with cash is literally being charged more than if you used, let's say, a rewards credit card that gives you some value back. I know we're talking about a tiny percentage here. It's like a fraction of a percent, but it is absolutely more. So cash payers actually pay more in most places, right? That doesn't give you a cash discount. Also, while liquid cash is relatively safe because it's backed by governments compared to, say, cryptocurrencies, it is by no means any less a faith-based currency at its core, right? It's simply our belief that most government will continue to exist that makes, federal legal tender valuable. So philosophically speaking, cash in terms of like a greenback is not actually fundamentally different than crypto still, right? Also, you know, I addressed that some places only take cash, but those are the places that eventually will go out of favor, okay? Just look at more tech-centric countries around the world, such as in East Asia, right, like in China, where almost no one uses cash there, even for minor purchases. So that is the trend that we're going towards, okay? And even, you know, I want to address the psychological reasons for using cash to help people budget. That can be overcome simply by instilling discipline in one's own mentality, right? While training oneself this way is certainly harder, but discipline in one aspect of life, we're talking about finances here, can often translate to other aspects of life as well, thus making you, the individual, simply a stronger and more resilient life form, just in general. So there's tremendous value in that. So I would argue you should train yourself to be more resilient and more disciplined just outside of money circumstances, right? But obviously what I find more interesting about the sentiment that cash is trash is that it's not really about cash as legal tender to pay for things. Rather, we're talking about cash as an asset class, right? So what's going on here? Why do investors generally abhor cash? Well, basically it's because of inflation, right? Cash is always losing value. It's a slow drain under normal circumstances, but it's slow and perpetual and certain, right? At best you lose a little bit of value, but in times of economic crisis, your cash reserves may lose plenty of value if it's at a high inflation environment, right? That's why you never hear old people talk about how much more expensive things are in the old days, but only the opposite, right? It's always like, I could used to be able to buy whatever with a nickel. Why? Because inflation is constant and it's forever. So you have to think about cash as being basically a lazy worker, right? When cash is acting as itself. It does nothing unless put to work in a investment vehicle. It could be as small of a job as sitting in a savings account, or as hard of a job as say, being exchanged for real estate, okay? Because when invested, the money value of cash will mean more money value can be generated, rather than money value simply being wasted away in the form of cash. Obviously, there are risks when it comes to investment in any form, and any kind of investment will carry slightly more risk compared to cash. The risk is something that you just have to take, because that's the only way that one's net worth can actually grow, right? So for people who are interested in FIRE, we're always talking about how you got to put every dollar to work, right? In that context, the actual cash reserves are the money that for one reason or another are simply not working at all, right? Its job is literally as a reserve force, right? So it is really only appropriate for an emergency fund, which is definitely usually, it has a numerical ceiling, right? So once you hit that emergency fund and it's full, you don't have to put any more into it in the form of cash. So at the end of the day, what's the decision, right? Is cash king or is it trash? I think the answer is definitely a little bit of both. I'd say it's relatively easy to break down depending on where you are on your money journey, right? Cash is king if you don't trust institutions and don't want to grow your money on its own, right? In a way, it's almost anti-capitalistic to not want money to grow on its own. If you don't exchange cash for assets that can be considered capital, you're not really engaging in capitalism at all, okay? So yeah, I'd say if you're a beginner in the money journey and very scared of money as a tool, then cash is king. People on this side of the fence generally, don't like change and want to hide bricks of cash under their mattress. Okay, that works until there's a fire, right? Yeah, so it really doesn't. Now, the cash is trash sentiment should be taken as a rule of thumb if you're on the complete opposite of the spectrum, right? If you want all your dollar bills to be working all the time in any form, ideally, income-generating asset in the form of an income-generating assets, right? Just look at the gold standard of investing, Mr. Warren Buffett, right? He's always lamenting when he has too much cash. Think about how different that is from the average person, the average Joe, who, let's say, they get an inheritance or something, or they get a bonus. All of a sudden, they're flush with cash. They always seem happy about it. Compared to Warren Buffett, when he has too much cash, he's like, I'm doing something wrong. Obviously, nothing is absolute, right, as I mentioned earlier. So a fully funded emergency fund should absolutely be in, well, at least cash equivalents, right, such as a high-yield savings account. And I mentioned, I personally always still carry a little bit of cash on me in my wallet, right? So does Warren Buffett, by the way. If you look at some of his interview, he talks about Like all he has is like a few $100 bills in his wallet. So while I lean towards invest your money, it doesn't mean that I don't understand that in the society that we live in right now, cash has its uses, right? It's just going to be increasingly less and less of it over time, right? At the end of the day, look, we also have sentimental attachment to cash, right? And nothing can replace, you know, say the making it rain bit of cash enjoyment, right? I also personally love legal tender just as souvenirs, right? Foreign coins and paper money of any sorts, to me, are beautiful objects of history, right? So from a perspective of art appreciation and history, cash is also useful. But in the context of trying to hit financial independence, a reliance on cash would be an actual disservice for the majority of you guys, right? So go out there, assign your dollar bills, you know, a job to do so they can do their own thing in the name of capitalism, right? The more work your money does, the less work you have to do. I am living proof of that. So cheers.